ATM mom made another deposit. These 4 words destroyed my life at 3 in the morning. My own son, Robert, wrote this in a group chat on WhatsApp where his wife, Isabella, had mistakenly added me. Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. For 4 years, I had sent $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year, totaling almost $150,000, believing I was helping my children get ahead. And they called me ATM Mom. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst came in the next message from my other son, Gideon. My 32-year-old baby, the Serenity House facility already confirmed, private room, $300 a week. In 2 weeks, we sign the mental incompetence papers and check her in. Mom will never know until she's inside. My breath caught in my throat. The phone trembled in my hands as if it were a venomous snake. Isabella immediately replied, "Perfect. The appraiser says the house is worth $500,000. Divided among the 3 of us, that's $166,000 each. We'll finally be rid of the heavy old lady." 3. No. 2 children divvying up my inheritance. 3 people, including my daughter-in-law, cutting up my life like butchers slicing meat. There I was, Chloe Wallace, 69 years old, a widow for 15 years, sending my full pension and the savings of a lifetime to 2 children who were planning to lock me up in a nursing home to take my house. This was the same house where Robert took his first steps, where Gideon cried in my arms when his father died, where I hung every family photo with infinite love. My legs gave out. I sat down on the edge of the bed, that marriage bed where I had slept alone for 15 years because I chose to dedicate my entire life to my children rather than rebuild my love life. The cotton sheets I had hand-embroidered felt rough against my skin. Everything in this room, every piece of furniture, every trinket, every memory, had been built thinking of Robert's and Gideon's well-being, and they saw it all as loot waiting to be collected. I picked up the phone again with trembling hands. The messages kept coming like precise dagger thrusts. Gideon wrote, "Did you talk to Dr. Evans yet? We need him to sign the diagnosis for senile dementia." I told him Mom forgets everything, that she repeats the same stories 1,000 times. A lie. My memory was perfectly intact. I remembered every penny I had sacrificed for them. Every night I skipped dinner so they could have extra money, every extra job I took to pay for their private college tuition. Robert replied, "Evans is already convinced. I showed him videos I took of Mom talking to herself in the garden. I told him she talks to Dad that she's losing her mind." The air escaped my lungs. I spoke to my husband's picture every morning while watering the plants. It was my way of keeping him alive in my heart. And my own son had recorded those intimate moments to use them as evidence of my supposed insanity. Isabella added, "I already copied all her cards. I've had the passwords for her bank accounts since last year. When we check her in, we can empty everything before she realizes. By the time she reacts, it'll be too late." They had been planning this for months. Every time Isabella came to visit me with her fake smiles and her Judas hugs, she was stealing information, studying my movements, preparing my destruction. The house creaked in the silence of the early morning. The same sound that had calmed me for 30 years now felt sinister. Every corner of my home had been contaminated by betrayal. I got up and walked to the living room where Robert and Gideon's graduation photos hung. I stood in the center, proud, radiant, holding my 2 princes. How naive I was to believe that maternal love was reciprocated. My reflection in the picture frame's glass returned the gaze of a destroyed woman. Gray hair, wrinkles that told stories of sacrifice, eyes that had cried more for others than for myself. This was the woman Robert and Gideon saw as a nuisance, as an obstacle between them and the money. The same woman who had worked 18-hour days to give them everything I never had. Until 6 months ago, everything seemed normal. Too normal. Now, reconstructing every moment, every gesture, every word, I realized the signs were there from the start, but I was too blind with maternal love to see them. Sundays were sacred in my house. Robert would arrive with Isabella and their 2 small children. Gideon would show up with his girlfriend of the moment, and I would cook for 8 people as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The last Sunday in October, I vividly recall the smell of roasted chicken filling the kitchen. I had gotten up early to prepare the baked potatoes, the soul food mac and cheese that Robert loved so much, and the sweet potato pie that Gideon had requested since he was a boy. The dining room table was set with the fine china I had inherited from my mother. The set I only used on special occasions, because I considered my children's visits always a special occasion. Isabella arrived in a new designer dress, one of those that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, and I noticed her expensive perfume, a fragrance she couldn't afford on the secretary's salary she claimed to have. "My beautiful mother-in-law, how's my favorite mom?" she said with that smile I now recognize as completely fake. Her eyes scanned the house as if she were appraising every piece of furniture, every trinket, every corner that would soon be hers. Robert came in carrying his youngest son, a 5-year-old boy who ran towards me shouting, "Grandma Chloe!" I lifted him into my arms, inhaling his scent of baby soap and apple shampoo. He was the only pure love left in that house. The child hugged my neck and whispered, "Grandma, why does Daddy say you won't live here anymore?" My heart skipped a beat, but Robert quickly intervened. "Kids make up so many things, Mom. Don't listen to him." Gideon appeared in the kitchen doorway, thinner than usual, with dark circles under his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. He came over and kissed my forehead, a gesture he had repeated since he was little, and that always melted my heart. "Smells delicious, Ma. Did you make chicken the way I like it?" he asked, while stealing a piece of crispy skin. I smiled, proud to still be the mother who knew her son's tastes. I didn't know they had already decided this would be my last Sunday cooking for them. During the meal, the conversation revolved around money, always money. Isabella mentioned they needed to replace their SUV because theirs had broken down. Robert talked about an investment opportunity that required startup capital. Gideon complained that his apartment rent had gone up and that he might have to move. I listened while serving more food, while refilling glasses, while making sure everyone had everything they needed. "Mom, you have to take better care of yourself," Isabella said, with a theatrical concern that now disgusted me. "I saw you talking to yourself in the garden yesterday. It's normal at your age, but you should get some medical checkups." Robert nodded gravely. "Yes, Ma, we're worried about you. Living alone in this big house isn't safe. Maybe you should consider some more comfortable options." The seed of the plan was already being planted at that Sunday table under the warm dining room light between the sound of silverware and the laughter of my grandchildren. Gideon took my hand, that rough hand that had worked all its life to give him everything he needed. "Ma, we want you close, but we also want you to be safe, to have medical attention if you need it. There are very nice places where you could live with people your age, with activities. Places, not homes. Places where they could visit me when it was convenient and forget me when it wasn't." The conversation shifted to other topics, but the damage was already done. They had sown the idea that I was a burden, that living alone was dangerous, that I needed supervision. After lunch, while I was washing the dishes, I heard Isabella talking on the phone in the garden. Her voice came muffled through the kitchen window. "Yes, Dr. Evans, the patient shows clear signs of deterioration. She talks to herself, forgets things, repeats stories. We need a professional evaluation as soon as possible." I dropped the plate I was drying. It shattered against the ceramic floor. Those pieces I now see as the perfect metaphor for what they had done to my life. Robert ran into the kitchen. "What happened, Ma? Did you hurt yourself?" His concern seemed genuine, but now I know he was only worried that I might suspect something. He helped me pick up the pieces, while I apologized for my clumsiness, for my carelessness, for being a useless old lady who couldn't even wash dishes without breaking them. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the same armchair where I had breastfed Robert and Gideon, where I had read hundreds of stories, where I had consoled tears and celebrated triumphs. The house was silent, but my mind roared with questions. How long had they been planning this? How many conversations had they had about my future without including me? How many Sundays had they come to my house just to study my weaknesses? I took the broom and swept up the last pieces of the broken plate. Every fragment that fell into the dustpan sounded like a revelation. They weren't visiting me out of love. They came to make sure I remained the useful mother, the one who cooked, the one who sent money, the one who didn't ask uncomfortable questions. They came to keep me calm until it was time to execute their plan. The first real sign that something terrible was brewing came a week after that Sunday. I was watering the orchids on the balcony when the doorbell rang. It was a young man in a gray suit with a smile too friendly to be sincere. "Good morning, Mrs. Wallace. I'm Dr. Garcia, a neurologist. Your son Robert asked me to come and give you a routine evaluation." My blood ran cold. None of my sons had mentioned anything about a neurologist. "There must be a mistake, doctor. I didn't request any evaluation," I said, keeping the door ajar. The man consulted a tablet and frowned theatrically. "According to my records, your family is very concerned about some episodes of confusion and memory loss. Robert mentioned that you frequently talk to yourself and sometimes forget important conversations." Every word was a slap in the face. My own son had fabricated symptoms to justify this man's visit. I let him in because my upbringing prevented me from being rude, but every instinct screamed that this was a trap. He sat on the living room sofa and began to ask seemingly innocent questions. "What day is today? What is your date of birth? Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning?" Questions that any person in their right mind could answer, but which he noted on his tablet as if they were evidence of something sinister. "Mrs. Wallace, is it true that you hold conversations with your deceased husband?" he asked with a condescending smile. I felt my dignity crumbling. "I talk to his photograph while I water the plants. It's my way of keeping the memories alive." The doctor wrote something else down, nodding as if he had confirmed a diagnosis. "That's completely normal in cases of unresolved grief, especially when combined with social isolation." Social isolation. As if choosing solitude over falsity were a disease, as if preferring the company of my plants and my memories over my children's lies were a symptom of dementia. The doctor continued with his interrogation, disguised as an evaluation. "Do you have difficulties managing your finances? Have you noticed forgetting to pay bills or making unnecessary purchases?" Every question was designed to create a profile of mental incapacity. "Doctor, my finances are perfectly organized. I have 40 years of experience working in accounting. I manage my money better than most people half my age." My response visibly made him uncomfortable. It wasn't the answer he expected. It didn't fit the script Robert had given him. He quickly changed strategies. "Of course, ma'am, but sometimes families notice changes that we don't perceive in ourselves." After an hour of invasive questions, the doctor said goodbye, promising to send a report to my family. Family. That word, which once filled me with pride, now sounded like a conviction. I closed the door behind him and leaned against the wood, feeling the walls of my own house closing in around me. They had sent a professional to legitimize my supposed incapacity. That afternoon, Robert called me with a concern I now know was completely feigned. "Ma, Dr. Garcia told me he visited you. He says you're fine, but we should do more tests just to be sure." His voice sounded affectionate, protective, like when he was a child asking me to put a bandage on a scrape. "I don't need more tests, Robert. I'm perfectly fine." But he insisted with that exasperating patience adults use with stubborn children. 2 days later, Isabella showed up at my door with a grocery bag, and that smile I now recognize as the perfect disguise for betrayal. "Mother-in-law, I came to keep you company and help you with the shopping." She walked into my house as if it were hers, inspecting every corner with appraiser's eyes. She headed directly to my home office, that small room where I kept my documents, my computer, my important files. "Do you need help with your papers, Mrs. Chloe? I see you have a lot of documents here. We could organize them better." Her hands were already touching my bills, my bank statements, my entire life reduced to papers that she considered disorganized. I watched her discreetly photograph some documents with her phone. I thought I was being paranoid, but now I know she was documenting my assets. "Isabella, I prefer to handle my own affairs," I said with all the firmness I could muster. She looked at me with the condescension reserved for the elderly, who don't know what's best for them. "Of course, mother-in-law, I just want to help. Robert and Gideon are very worried about you. They say you sometimes forget to pay bills or repeat the same stories." More lies. My accounts were up to date. My stories were coherent. My mind worked perfectly, but the damage was done. Every visit from Isabella, every call from Robert, every message from Gideon was a piece of a puzzle being assembled without my consent. They were building a case against my sanity, against my independence, against my right to live in my own house. And like a fool, I was making their job easier by being the loving mother I had always been. One night, while reviewing my bank statements, I noticed something strange. $500 had been withdrawn from my savings account using my debit card, but I had my card with me. I had never made that withdrawal. I immediately called the bank. "Mrs. Wallace, the withdrawal was made at the ATM at the Willow Creek Mall branch last Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon. Last Tuesday, I had been home all day, watering my plants, talking to my husband's photo, being the crazy old lady my children needed me to be. Isabella had a copy of my card. That was my first absolute certainty that they were stealing from me. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't senile confusion. It wasn't my imagination. It was a planned, systematic theft executed by the woman who called me dear mother-in-law and kissed my cheeks every Sunday. The same day I discovered the unauthorized withdrawal, Gideon called me to say he needed extra money for a job training course. "It's $2,000, Ma. It's an investment in my future." I sent him the money as always, but for the first time in 4 years, something in my stomach twisted in an unpleasant way. It wasn't maternal love motivating me. It was fear. Fear that if I stopped sending money, if I stopped being useful, they would accelerate their plans to get rid of me. I was buying time with my own pension, paying for a few more months of freedom without knowing it. The following days became a nightmare of constant surveillance. My children had stopped pretending. Robert would show up unannounced, using the spare key I had given him years ago for emergencies. "I just came to see how you are, Ma," he would say, while his eyes scanned every room as if he were inventorying my possessions. He would now sit in my living room, watching me, waiting for me to make some mistake he could use as evidence of my mental decline. Isabella arrived with increasingly elaborate excuses. "Mother-in-law, I came to clean up a bit because I know you can't do it like you used to." A lie. My house was immaculate, as it had always been, but she brought her own cleaning products, moved my furniture, reorganized my belongings. It was an invasion disguised as help, a way to demonstrate that I was no longer capable of caring for my own home. Gideon had become more direct in his requests for money. He no longer invented elaborate emergencies. He simply called and said, "Ma, I need $2,000. I'll pay you back next month." He never did. He never explained what he needed it for, never showed the slightest gratitude. It was as if he were entitled to my money, as if I were effectively the ATM he had mentioned in that cursed group. One morning, while having breakfast in the kitchen, I heard voices in my yard. I peered through the window and saw a man in blue overalls measuring the backyard with a tape measure. Robert was beside him, pointing out different areas and taking notes in a notebook. My heart pounded. I ran out still in my robe and slippers. "What's going on here? Who is this man?" Robert looked at me with that patronizing smile he had perfected in recent weeks. "Ma, it's just a technician. We're seeing if you need some repairs on the house. The yard needs maintenance. The plumbing might have problems. You know how old houses are." An old house, just like his mother. The technician looked at both of us with obvious discomfort and muttered something about coming back later with an estimate. "Robert, this is my house. If I need repairs, I decide when and how to do them." My voice trembled with indignation, but he interpreted it as senile weakness. Of course, Ma. We're just trying to help you. You can't handle everything alone at your age. 69 years old was not 90. I was healthy, strong, and mentally clear, but to them, I was a decrepit old woman who couldn't make decisions about her own life. That afternoon, Isabella showed up with papers. Mother-in-law, we brought some documents for you to sign. They're to make things easier, so Robert and Gideon can help you better with your affairs. The papers were power of attorney forms, documents that would give my children total control over my bank accounts, my property, my medical decisions. I will not sign anything without having my lawyer review these documents first, I told them with all the firmness I could gather. Robert stiffened. It was the first time I had directly opposed their plans. Ma, don't be stubborn. We're just trying to protect you. If something happens to you, we need to be able to act fast. Protect me, the cruelest word they had used so far. Protect me from my own life, from my own independence, from my own dignity. I don't need protection. I need you to respect my decisions. The tension in the room became palpable. Isabella exchanged a look with Robert, one of those meaningful glances they had perfected during months of conspiracy. Mrs. Chloe, Isabella said with a poisonous sweetness, maybe we should talk to Dr. Garcia again. He said these episodes of paranoia are common in people your age when they live alone for too long. Paranoia. That word was like a slap. It wasn't paranoia to suspect people who talked behind my back, who took my money without permission, who brought technicians to my house without consulting me, who wanted me to sign legal documents without explanation. It was survival instinct. It was intelligence. It was the last defense of a woman who had begun to see the truth behind the lies. I think you should leave, I told them, getting up from the sofa with all the dignity I could muster. I need time to think. Robert approached me with a threatening gesture, but controlled himself at the last moment. All right, Ma, but these papers are important. You can't keep living as if you were the only person in the world. You have family. You have responsibilities to us, too. Responsibilities to them. As if I hadn't spent my entire adult life fulfilling responsibilities to them. As if I hadn't sacrificed my dreams, my youth, my opportunities to rebuild my life to give them everything they needed and more. As if after 40 years of being a mother, I now had to justify my right to live in my own house. After they left, I sat at my desk and pulled out all the bank statements from the last 6 months. I started calculating, looking for patterns, documenting every irregularity. Unauthorized withdrawals, purchases I didn't remember making, transfers that appeared as if they were made by me, but which I had never ordered. The evidence was there, in black and white. They had been systematically robbing me for months. I took my phone and dialed the number of Lillian, my lifelong neighbor, the only person I could completely trust. Lillian, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come over? Her voice immediately sounded concerned. Chloe, what's wrong? You sound really upset. In 30 years of friendship, Lillian had witnessed my entire life. She had seen Robert and Gideon grow up. She had celebrated their graduations. She had cried with me when I lost my husband. When Lillian arrived, I showed her the bank statements. I told her about Dr. Garcia's visit, about the technicians in my yard, about the papers they wanted me to sign. She listened in silence, her face hardening with every revelation. Chloe, this isn't normal. This is financial and emotional abuse. Your own children are setting you up to steal everything from you. Hearing those words from another person made them real, indisputable. What can I do, Lillian? They're my children. I love them, but I can't pretend I don't see what's happening anymore. Lillian took my hands in hers, those hands that had shared thousands of cups of coffee, that had consoled tragedies and celebrated joys. Chloe, maternal love doesn't mean allowing them to destroy you. You have to protect yourself, because they clearly aren't going to. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea and looking at the family photos stuck on the refrigerator door. Robert with his first lost tooth. Gideon at his high school graduation. All of us during the last Christmas, when I still believed I had a family that loved me. Every image was a lie. Every smile an act that had lasted years without me realizing it. At 5 a.m, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. The first thing I did was call my bank as soon as the offices opened. I need to cancel all my debit and credit cards immediately. I also want to change all the access codes for my accounts." The account executive seemed surprised by the urgency in my voice. "Has there been any security issue, Mrs. Wallace?" "Security issue, yes. The problem was that my own children had access to my money without my permission. There has been unauthorized activity in my accounts. I need to protect my assets immediately." Within 2 hours, I had new cards, new passwords, and I had set security alerts on all my accounts. Any unusual movement would be immediately notified to me by text message. It was my first line of defense, my way of cutting off the flow of money that had been feeding the vampires I called my sons. The next step was more emotionally difficult. I called a lawyer specializing in family law whom Lillian had recommended. Mr. Samuel Preston had offices downtown in a sleek building that intimidated me a little. But when I entered his office and began to tell him my story, his expression became serious and understanding. "Mrs. Wallace, what you are describing is a classic case of elder financial abuse. Unfortunately, it's more common than people think." I showed him all the documents I had gathered, the bank statements with unauthorized withdrawals, the copies of the WhatsApp messages I had managed to print before they removed me from the group, the records of the money transfers I had made for 4 years. "Your sons have been building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent. This would allow them to take legal control of all your assets," he explained while reviewing the papers. "Can they do that? Can they take everything I've worked for my entire life?" My voice broke as I asked that question. Mr. Preston looked at me with a mixture of compassion and determination. "Not if we act quickly and smartly. We need to document your mental capacity, protect your assets, and prepare a solid legal defense. But Mrs. Wallace, you have to be prepared for a battle. Your sons won't accept this easily." I left that office with an action plan and a psychological evaluation scheduled for the following week. The doctor who would examine me was independent, with no connection whatsoever to the Dr. Garcia whom Robert had sent. I also had an appointment with a certified public accountant to review all my finances and create a complete inventory of my assets. It was like preparing for a war against my own children. The following days were strangely quiet. Robert and Gideon didn't show up at my house, didn't call me, didn't ask for money. It was as if they knew something had changed, as if they could sense that their plan had met with resistance. I used that time to strengthen my defenses. I changed the locks on my house, installed a security camera at the main entrance, and hid all my important documents in a safe I bought specifically for that purpose. Lillian came to visit me every afternoon. She had become my ally, the sister I never had, the only person I could completely trust. "Chloe, you have to be ready for what's coming. When they realize they can no longer access your money, they're going to intensify the pressure. They'll try to convince you that you're sick, that you need help, that they only want what's best for you." She was right. On Wednesday afternoon, Robert showed up unannounced. He had forgotten I changed the locks, so he had to ring the doorbell like any visitor. When I opened the door, his face reflected a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Ma, why did you change the locks? What if you have an emergency and we need to get in?" His concern was so fake that I felt like laughing. "Robert, if I have an emergency, I'll call 911 like any adult. I no longer need you to have keys to my house." I tried to close the door, but he put his foot in the way to prevent it. "Ma, you've been acting really weird lately. Isabella and I are worried. Dr. Garcia says these behavioral changes can be symptoms of—" I didn't let him finish. "Dr. Garcia can go to hell, Robert, and so can you if you don't respect my decision." It was the first time in my life I had spoken like that to one of my children. The look of shock on his face was almost comical. For 69 years, I had been the perfect mother, the one who never raised her voice, the one who always pleased, the one who put others' needs before her own. But that woman had died the night I read the WhatsApp group messages. The woman standing at that door was new, stronger, more dangerous. "Ma, I think you need professional help urgently. This isn't normal. We're going to have to make difficult decisions if you keep this up." His threat was clear and direct. No more subtle manipulation, no more false concerns. It was a declaration of war. Robert, the only difficult decision you're going to have to make is how to live without your mother's money. I closed the door in his face and locked it. I leaned against the door, listening to his footsteps fade away down the yard path. My heart was pounding as if I had run a marathon, but I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had taken control. I had set boundaries, I had said no, and it felt incredibly liberating. That night, while having dinner alone in my kitchen, I looked around my house and saw it with new eyes. It wasn't a prison my children were going to rescue me from. It was my refuge, my fortress, my kingdom. And I was the queen of this space I had built with my work, my sacrifice, my self-respect. No one was going to take me out of here without my consent. No one was going to turn me into a victim of my own maternal generosity. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed my plan with a surgeon's precision. Every morning, I woke up with a clear purpose: document everything, protect my assets, and prepare my escape from this family that had decided to sacrifice me for money. The psychological evaluation had been a complete success. Dr. Herrera, a renowned psychiatrist with no ties to my sons, had certified my perfect mental health. "Mrs. Wallace, you are more lucid and coherent than many people half your age," he had written in his report. Meanwhile, Robert and Gideon intensified their smear campaign. Robert had called my few close friends, telling them I was developing signs of senile dementia. "My mother is very confused lately. She says strange things. She forgets important conversations. Sometimes she doesn't recognize people." Lillian told me she had received one of those calls. "He told me you're paranoid, that you think the family is stealing from you." I tried not to laugh in his face, Chloe. That boy has no idea who his mother really is. Isabella had been more subtle, but equally venomous. She had posted a photo of me on Facebook from the last family Sunday with a message that chilled my blood when Lillian showed it to me, praying for my dear mother-in-law who is going through a difficult time. Aging is hard, especially when living alone. Family means being there in tough times, even if the person we love doesn't always understand that we only want to help. Family is everything. Unconditional love. The comments were even worse. Isabella's friends expressed their solidarity. "How hard it is to watch our loved ones grow old. Your mother-in-law is lucky to have you. It's so tough when they become stubborn and won't accept help." They had created a complete narrative on social media where I was the problematic elder and they were the suffering children trying to help a stubborn mother. But I was no longer the same naive woman I had been 2 weeks ago. Every lie they spread, every false concern they expressed, every manipulation they attempted only strengthened my resolve. I hired a private investigator recommended by Mr. Preston. Frank was a serious man in his 50s, a former police officer who specialized in family fraud cases. "Mrs. Wallace, we are going to document everything your sons have been doing, every unauthorized withdrawal, every lie they've told, every step of their plan to have you declared incompetent." The detective had installed additional cameras around my house, all perfectly legal as they were on my property. He had also started following Robert and Isabella, documenting their activities, their meetings with lawyers, their visits to retirement facilities. "Your sons have visited 3 different assisted living facilities in the last 2 weeks, Frank informed me during one of our secret meetings. They have also met twice with a lawyer specializing in mental incapacity declarations." The most devastating information came when Frank managed to access Robert's phone records. "Your son has been in regular contact with Dr. Garcia for the last 3 months. He has also made calls to real estate agencies, appraisers, and a company that specializes in liquidating elderly properties." Every piece of evidence confirmed what I already knew. They had been planning this for months, perhaps years, but the most painful revelation came when Frank showed me the audio recordings he had legally obtained. Robert and Isabella had been recorded without knowing it during a conversation in a public restaurant. Their voices came through clear and cold over the headphones. "Once she's in the facility, we can sell the house immediately. The appraiser says in the current market, we could get 600,000, maybe more. Isabella's voice was even more calculating. My lawyer says that if we have the certificate of mental incapacity, we can act as her legal guardians. She can never reverse the decisions we make. It's like she's legally dead. Legally dead. Those two words cut through me like daggers. To them, I was already a breathing corpse, an obstacle between them and the money. But Robert continued with details that crushed me. The best part is that once she's checked in, we won't have to send anyone monthly money anymore. Gideon can find a real job instead of living off Mom's pension. Gideon was also included in this plan. My baby, my youngest son. The one who cried in my arms when he had nightmares had been faking financial need to empty my accounts faster. That night, after listening to the recordings, I sat in my living room surrounded by cardboard boxes. I had discreetly started packing my most valuable possessions, my mother's jewelry, the important documents, the photographs that truly meant something to me. Not all the photos, only those where my husband appeared, where I appeared in genuinely happy moments before motherhood became a curse that would cost me everything I had built. Lillian arrived with tea and cookies, as she had done every night since this battle began. You've made the final decision, Chloe. I nodded, without looking up from the box I was filling. I'm going to sell the house without telling them anything. Mr. Preston already has an interested buyer, someone who can close the cash transaction in less than a week. By the time they realize, I'll be long gone. And where are you going? That was the question I had been avoiding answering, even for myself. To Portugal. I have a second cousin in Lisbon, Valeria Preston, whom I barely knew as a child, but who has been writing to me for years inviting me to visit. It's going to be my new life, Lillian, away from these vampires I once called my children. The plan was simple but effective. I would sell the house, transfer the money to an account in Portugal, and move permanently. I had researched the residency laws for seniors with economic resources. With the money from the sale of my house and my savings, I could live comfortably in Lisbon for the rest of my life. More importantly, I would be in a country where Robert, Gideon, and Isabella would have no legal power over me. Chloe, are you sure you want to cut ties completely? Maybe you could give them a chance to explain. I interrupted her with a bitter smile. Lillian, they had 4 years of opportunities to treat me with respect. They chose to treat me like an ATM. Now they'll discover what it feels like when the ATM runs out of money forever. I handed her a sealed letter for Robert and another for Gideon. I also gave her a copy of all the legal documents, the sale of the house, the transfer of funds, my new will in which I completely disinherited them, and a notarized declaration explaining the reasons for my decisions. I want them to know exactly why they lost their mother. Not because of dementia, not because of confusion, but because of greed, because of betrayal, because of treating me as if I were their property instead of their mother. My flight was leaving at 11 at night. I arrived at the airport 3 hours early, not out of necessity, but because I wanted to savor every moment of my freedom. I sat in the waiting area with a coffee and watched the family saying goodbye with genuine tears, parents and children hugging with real love, not the falsity I had been tolerating for years. It hurt a little, but more than pain, I felt relief at having escaped that emotional prison. At 10:30, when I was already boarding the plane, I received the first call from Robert. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Gideon. I didn't answer him either. In total, during the 7-hour flight to Lisbon, I received 37 missed calls. Text messages also arrived, which I didn't read until I was on Portuguese soil. "Ma, where are you? Lillian says you sold the house. That can't be true. We're desperate. Please answer." Desperate. Now they knew what desperation felt like. For 4 years I had lived desperate for their genuine love, for their respect, for being treated as a mother and not as a source of income. Now they would experience the desperation of losing something they believed belonged to them by right. The difference was that what I had lost was emotional. What they were losing was financial, and that difference said everything about who we really were. In Lisbon, I took the train to Faro in the Algarve region. During the 5-hour journey, I looked out the window at the Portuguese landscapes that would become my new daily view. Orange groves, ancient towns, mountains that had existed long before Robert and Gideon were born, and that would continue to exist long after I died. There was perspective in that immensity. There was peace in that permanence. My cousin Valeria Preston was waiting for me at the Faro station with a sign that read, "Welcome home, Chloe." We had only met once at my mother's funeral 20 years ago, but we had maintained sporadic correspondence. When I wrote to her telling her about my situation, her response had been immediate. "Cousin, Portugal is waiting for you. You can start over here." Valeria was 72, a widow like me, and had lived alone for the last decade. We looked more alike than I remembered. She took me to a small but bright apartment in the historic center of Faro, 2 blocks from the cathedral. "It's yours for as long as you want, Chloe. I live upstairs. We can be neighbors or sisters or whatever you need to be." The apartment had balconies overlooking an ancient square where seniors played chess and children ran among the pigeons. It was exactly the opposite of the life I had been living. Authentic, simple, peaceful. That first night in Faro, I sat on the balcony with a glass of local red wine and turned on my phone after having it off for 12 hours. There were 143 missed messages. Robert, Gideon, Isabella, numbers I didn't recognize, all wanting to know where I was, all demanding explanations, all furious because their plan had failed. I read some of the most recent messages. Robert: "Ma, this is crazy. You can't sell the house without consulting us. That house was our family heritage." Family heritage, as if they had contributed a single penny to buy it, maintain it, or turn it into a home. Isabella: "Mrs. Chloe, please answer. The children are asking about Grandma. They don't understand why you left without saying goodbye." Using my grandchildren as emotional blackmail. The last resort of desperate manipulators. Gideon had sent the most revealing message. "Ma, I know you're angry, but you can't punish us like this. We depend on you. How are we going to live without your help?" There was the naked truth. They weren't worried about my well-being, my loneliness, my happiness. They were worried about losing their source of income. We depend on you. At 32, Gideon admitted he was financially dependent on his retired mother. I deleted all the messages without replying to any. I turned off the phone and put it in the bedside table drawer. Tomorrow I would buy a Portuguese number, a new digital identity for my new life. Tonight, I simply wanted to enjoy the silence of a clear conscience, the fresh air coming in through the balcony, the sound of church bells marking the hours of a life that finally belonged completely to me. The following days in Faro passed like a golden haze of rediscovery. For the first time in decades, I woke up without the anxiety of knowing when the phone would ring asking for money, without the tension of pretending not to see the lies, without the burden of supporting a family that had turned me into their financial slave. Valeria took me around the city, introduced me to her friends at the book club, showed me the markets where oranges smelled of sun and flowers were sold for coins instead of bills. But the peace wouldn't last long. On the 5th day, while having breakfast on the apartment terrace, Valeria came up with a worried expression. "Chloe, there's a man downstairs asking for you. He says he's your son, Robert, and he came from the States to look for you." My heart stopped. I had underestimated their desperation. Not only had they lost the monthly money and the future inheritance, but now they had to face debts and commitments they had assumed counting on my money. "Tell him I'm not here. Tell him he has the wrong person." Valeria looked at me with total understanding. During these days, I had told her the whole story, every detail of the betrayal, every lie I had discovered. "I already told him no Chloe Wallace lives here, but he won't leave. He's standing in the square with a picture of you, asking everyone if they've seen you." From the balcony, I could see him. Robert, my older son, the one who had suckled at my breast, the one who had learned to read sitting on my knees, was in the square like a hunter pursuing his prey. He was wearing the same blue shirt he wore to family gatherings, the one I had given him last year, believing he saw me as his mother and not as his victim. He had deep, dark circles. He had lost weight. Desperation had changed his face. "Valeria, do you know a place where I can stay for a few days until he leaves?" She immediately nodded. "My sister Carmen has a house in a town near Lagos. You can stay there as long as you need. Robert will never find you." I quickly packed while Valeria kept watch from the balcony. He approached the elderly couple playing chess. "He's showing them your picture." The hunt had begun. Robert had invested money he probably didn't have in a plane ticket to Portugal, in accommodation, in the search for a mother who had decided he no longer deserved to find her. It was ironic. Now he was spending his money trying to regain access to mine. We left through the back door of the building. Valeria had called a cab that was waiting for us on the back street. As we drove away from Faro, I could see Robert in the distance, still standing in the square, turning his head in all directions like a lost animal. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but I immediately suppressed it, remembering the WhatsApp group messages, the detectives' recordings, the plans to check me in to steal my house. Valeria's sister's house was in a coastal town called Alvor, where the Atlantic stretched infinite and blue to the horizon. Carmen was a 60-year-old retired teacher who welcomed me as if I were a long-lost sister. "Any enemy of abusive children is a friend of mine," she told me as she showed me the room with an ocean view. "My own son hasn't spoken to me since I refused to sell my condo to pay his gambling debts." For a week, I lived in that house facing the sea, waking up to the sound of the waves and sleeping with the salty aroma coming in through the window. Every morning, I walked along the beach, collected seashells, watched the fishermen going out before dawn. It was a simple life, uncomplicated, without phones ringing, without lies to detect. It was the life I deserved after 69 years of giving everything and receiving betrayal in return. But Robert had not given up. Valeria called me every day to report his movements. He had placed ads on Facebook looking for me. He had gone to the local police. He had visited hospitals asking if a black woman my age had been admitted. "He says you're sick, that you have dementia, that you need urgent medication," Valeria told me during one of our calls. "He also says you stole money from the family before you left." I stole money from the family. The inversion of reality was perfect. The thief accusing the victim of theft. Robert had turned my escape into a crime, my liberation into a kidnapping of my own money. He had probably convinced half the world that I was a confused old woman who had made irrational decisions because of senile dementia. On the 8th day, Carmen came into my room with a serious expression. "Chloe, there's news you need to know. Robert went to the local media in Faro. There's a report in the newspaper saying his mother disappeared with a mental illness and may be in danger." She showed me the newspaper on her tablet. There was my photo, one they had taken from Isabella's Facebook, with the headline, "American Family Desperately Seeks Missing Mother with Signs of Dementia." The article was a masterpiece of manipulation. Robert appeared as the devoted son who had traveled thousands of miles to find his sick mother. He spoke of my progressive mental decline, my erratic behavior, his desperation to ensure I received the medical attention I needed. He didn't mention the money, didn't mention the sold house, didn't mention 4 years of bank transfers. He only presented the image of a loving son looking for his lost mother. "What are we going to do?" Carmen asked. I closed the tablet and walked to the window overlooking the sea. For a week, I had lived in peace, but I knew that peace was temporary. Robert wouldn't give up until he found me or until he ran out of money to continue searching. And now he had involved the media. He had made his version of the story public. It was time for the final confrontation. "We're going back to Faro," I said, with a calm that surprised even me. "It's time for Robert and me to have the conversation we should have had 4 years ago, but this time, we're going to have it on my terms." I returned to Faro on a Tuesday morning, not as a fugitive, but as a woman who had taken absolute control of her destiny. Valeria was waiting for me at the station with news. Robert was still in the city, but no longer searching the streets. He had checked into a hotel near the square where he had first appeared, waiting for me to show up or for someone to recognize me from the newspaper article. "He looks like a ghost, Chloe," He's lost a lot of weight. He barely eats. He just walks around the city with that photo of you as if it were a sacred relic." That afternoon, I called the newspaper that had published the story. I asked to speak to the journalist who had written the article about the missing mother with dementia. "I am Chloe Wallace, the woman you are looking for. I want to grant an interview to tell my side of the story." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several seconds. "Mrs. Wallace, are you all right? Your son says—" I interrupted him with a firmness I had learned during these months of transformation. "I am perfectly fine and perfectly sane, and I have documents to prove it." The interview was scheduled for the next day at the same cafe in the square where Robert had been asking about me. It was poetic. The place where he had started his hunt would be the place where I would end this story forever. That night I prepared all the documents: the psychological evaluation certifying my mental health, the detective's recordings proving my son's true intentions, the bank statements showing 4 years of money transfers, the copies of the WhatsApp group messages where they called me ATM Mom. On Wednesday at 10 in the morning, I sat on the cafe terrace with the journalist, a young man named Antonio, who seemed genuinely surprised to meet a lucid, articulate woman completely in control of her faculties. "Mrs. Wallace, your son claims you suffer from senile dementia and that you disappeared from the United States in a state of confusion." I smiled with the same serenity I had practiced for weeks. "My son is lying, and I have the evidence to prove it." I showed him every document, every recording, every piece of evidence of the systematic betrayal I had suffered. Antonio listened with eyes widening, taking notes frantically. This completely changes the story," he muttered as he reviewed the transcripts of the recordings where Robert and Isabella planned to institutionalize me. "Your son didn't mention anything about money, about institutionalization plans, about—" "Of course he didn't," I interrupted. "Abusers never mention the real motives for their actions." At 11:30, while Antonio and I were still talking, Robert appeared in the square. It was as if he had sensed my presence, as if some primal instinct had told him that his prey had finally come out of hiding. He saw me through the cafe glass, and his face completely transformed. Desperation turned into relief, relief into determination, determination into an expression that was familiar to me, the look he got when he was a child and knew he had done something wrong but believed he could manipulate me to avoid punishment. He entered the cafe without hesitation. "Mom, thank God! I've been looking for you for 2 weeks. I was desperate. I thought—" He stopped when he saw the journalist, when he noticed the documents scattered on the table, when he realized this wasn't the emotional reunion he had imagined. "What is going on here?" His voice had changed. The false concern had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. "I'm telling my story, Robert. The real story, not the version you've been spreading through the media." I got up from the chair and faced him directly for the first time since I had discovered his betrayal. "I'm telling about the 4 years you stole money from me, about the plans to check me into a facility, about the lies you invented to make me seem mentally ill." Robert looked around the cafe nervously. Other people had started paying attention to our conversation. "Mom, you're confused. We never wanted to hurt you. Everything we did was for your own good." The lie came out of his mouth with the same ease he had shown for years, but now I had the weapons to fight it. "For my own good. Like when you called me ATM Mom in your WhatsApp group, like when you planned to empty my bank accounts after institutionalizing me." His face went pale. He hadn't expected me to have concrete evidence. The journalist observed everything with professional fascination. This wasn't just a story of a dysfunctional family. It was a story of elder financial abuse, a topic that was beginning to receive media attention in Portugal. "Mr. Robert, do you have any comment on the recordings where you and your wife discuss plans to institutionalize your mother and sell her house?" Robert looked at me with a mixture of panic and rage I had never seen in his eyes before. "Those recordings are illegal. They were obtained without our consent." He had become someone else in front of my eyes, someone who used legal technicalities instead of emotional explanations. The recordings were legally obtained by a private detective in public places, I replied with a calm that surprised me. But more important than their legality is their veracity. Do you deny you said those things, Robert? The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Robert looked toward the cafe door as if he were calculating whether he could escape, but there were too many people watching, too many witnesses to his public humiliation. Finally, his face hardened with an expression I recognized from his childhood, the one he put on when he realized he couldn't manipulate me and decided to use direct aggression. "Fine, Mom. You want to play this way? Perfect. Yes, we wanted your money. Yes, we planned to check you in. And you know what? You deserved it. 40 years of our lives dedicated to pleasing you, to visiting you, to putting up with your repetitive stories and your constant need for attention. It was time for you to pay us back for all that." The mask had completely fallen. I was finally seeing the real Robert, the man who had been hidden behind the affectionate son for decades. I sat down again, not out of weakness, but because I wanted to be comfortable for the moment I had been waiting for months. "Robert, you never had to visit me. You never had to call me. You never had to pretend to love me. All you had to do was be honest. Tell me you only saw me as a source of money. It would have been painful, but I would have respected your honesty more than 4 years of lies." I took my purse and pulled out an envelope I had prepared the night before. "This is a copy of my new will. All my money, all my property, everything you ever thought you would inherit, is now going to charities that help elderly victims of family abuse. Robert, officially, you are no longer my son, and please tell Gideon that he isn't either." I got up from the table with a dignity that had taken 69 years to find. Robert remained standing in the cafe with the envelope in his hands, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed the end of a relationship he had destroyed with his own greed. I didn't look back as I walked out. There was nothing behind me worth remembering. That afternoon, I walked through the streets of Faro as a completely free woman. The article would be published the next day with the headline, "The Silent Vengeance of a Betrayed Mother." Robert would return to the States without money, without an inheritance, without a mother. Gideon and Isabella would discover that their plan had not only failed, but had resulted in the total loss of everything they had been coveting. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment with a glass of wine, watching the seniors playing chess in the square. Tomorrow, my new life would officially begin. A life where no one would call me ATM Mom, where no one would pretend to love me for my money, where I could finally be Chloe Wallace instead of being someone else's mother. I had won the hardest war of my life, the war against my own need to be loved by people who didn't deserve me. The Atlantic wind carried the scent of orange blossoms and sea salt to my balcony. It was the perfume of freedom, the aroma of a woman who had learned that self-love is worth more than the feigned love of others. I would never return to the States. I would never again answer calls from my ex-sons. I would never again be a victim of my own maternal generosity. I was free, and that freedom tasted better than any fake hug I had received in the last 4 years. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.